Please welcome the commander of Maui's home team, the 15th Space Surveillance Squadron, Lieutenant Colonel Wagenbach, to introduce our next speaker.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce Colonel Raj Agrawal. He is the current commander of Space Delta II, performing space domain awareness and space battle management. He earned his commission from the United States Air Force Officer Training School in 2001 after serving as a school teacher in Texas for 8 years. He previously commanded the then 20th Space Control Squadron, and he has extensive operational command and control experience, having served at 5 different air and space operations centers. He is a trusted joint space operations leader in mission areas including space battle management, offensive space control, offensive cyber operations, strategic and theater missile defense, covert offensive cyber operations, strategic and theater missile defense, covert unmanned aerial systems, and special technical operations. Colonel Agrawal is a graduate of the United States Air Force Weapons School, the U.S. Army Air Defense Artillery Fire Control Officer School, and a distinguished graduate of Air Command and Staff College and the Eisenhower School, also a graduate of the School of Advanced Air and Space Studies, and he has a PhD in Business Administration. Please join me in welcoming Colonel Raj Agrawal.
Good job.
It's all yours.
All right. I did not expect this many people. Hey, good morning. I'm Colonel Raj Agrawal. As Wags said, I'm so proud of Wags. Are you guys proud of Wags? He's incredible. Yeah. So, yeah, for the past few months, I've been commander of Space Delta II. Similar to many of you here, and I know many of you, I've been involved in space situational awareness, space domain awareness, and battle management for a couple of decades. And I think you know there's no more critical time in history than right now to posture our defense apparatus to deter unprofessional behavior in the space domain. It's good to be back in Hawaii, a place I very much consider home. The safety of these sacred islands is our collective responsibility. I'd also like to add my own honor and respect to this island's first responders and all those affected by the recent tragedy. I'm grateful for our 15th Space Surveillance Squadron who joined local efforts to provide for the needs of this community. And thanks again to WAGS for your leadership of our small team here on Maui, which has become a strategic location when it comes to deterring and, if necessary, responding to aggression in the space domain. In 2007, I was a junior captain assigned to Joint Space Operations Center under the command of then Lieutenant Colonel Chance Salzman and Colonel Stephen Whiting. I remember the day when space situational awareness became wholly insufficient to keep up with the changing character of conflict. I was on crew at the JSPOC when China launched a direct ascent anti-satellite weapon at one of their own satellites, instantly creating what we later learned was 2,700 pieces of debris. We had very little capability then to keep up with the increasing debris count, but it was immediately clear to me that providing situational awareness of where objects are in space was no longer sufficient. We needed the infusion of intelligence and the metaphor of a security domain to shift from space situational awareness to space domain awareness. But I'm here to share with you that space domain awareness is no longer sufficient for this current evolution of the character of warfare. And the threat of conflict continues to extend into space. Russia and China understood, perhaps before the United States did, the central role that space-enabled capabilities allow for in modern warfare and our way of life. Democratic nations have increased reach and are more efficient, precise, prosperous, and informed as a result of space sector innovation. To counter the extension of democracy into the space domain, Russia and China developed and tested an array of counter-space weapons to deny the free and democratic use of space. The threats that we face have dramatically increased since I first joined Air Force Space Command in 2001. Space domain awareness and understanding of space through the lens of national security objectives is no longer sufficient to outpace the threats we now face and those projected by our intelligence professionals. We must apply joint fundamentals to turn an understanding of this critical security domain into coalition joint, and service military options. I call this process turning understanding into opportunity. Battle management is a joint framework that allows for translating understanding into opportunity. And if aligned with the right set of sensors, training, tools, and TTPs, provides military options that outpace adversary action. The definition behind me is taken from Space Force's capstone and reiterated in the SDA operations concept signed by Lieutenant General Burt earlier this year. It's the foundation upon which I've given my commander's intent to Space Delta II and our stakeholders. And while space domain awareness is our obligation as a necessary condition for all who operate in space, space battle management is our warfighting discipline to ensure space remains safe, accessible, all while denying hostile actors opportunity themselves. In the context of a military service, Space Delta II provides military options to United States Space Command and the President of the United States to secure our nation's interest in, from, and to space. Ultimately, our goal is to ensure adherence to established international norms. We must responsibly model the space terrain, identify and anticipate irresponsible behavior, offer military options when necessary, and tightly integrate those options through completion. Our space battle management centers are geographically and functionally separated. Many of you are familiar with the 18th Space Defense Squadron at Vandenberg Space Force Base, so I won't go into great detail here, but I've tasked the 18th to focus on responsively and comprehensively mapping the orbital space terrain and to conduct threat identification in a geocentric regime. That includes geosynchronous orbit and inward, and this task has become exponentially more complex with the rise of what we call mega constellations. Threats take on many forms, particularly in low Earth orbit, but our most sacred of missions is protection of human spaceflight. And we do this in partnership with NASA on a 24/7 basis, with NASA personnel operating side by side with our Delta II personnel. Now, as an aside, many of you know Diana McKissick. She leads our space office, and I have asked her to take on OSIC level responsibility with her given grade. And she now reports directly to me as a geographically separated part of Space Delta II headquarters. She will remain closely tied to the 18th and CIFSIC operations at Vandenberg, but scaling to be representative of all our Space Delta II units in our mission. The 19th Space Defense Squadron, located at Naval Support Facility Dahlgren, Virginia, has a rich heritage in space operations, continuing to do much of what they've always done. However, what has made the 19th possibly our greatest growth opportunity is that they are the only unit in the United States Space Force focused on cislunar regime security. They also provide critical counter space support to the Navy and have taken on ownership of the collision avoidance mission. In many ways, our Dahlgren team is no longer simply the backup to our primary ops center, but has become its own distinct center with functions unique to that squadron. And finally, a unit many of you may not be familiar with is the 18th Space Defense Squadron's Detachment 1, a detachment I intend to grow into a separate squadron. Detachment 1 is co-located with the National Space Defense Center and operates at the nexus of space battle management, integrating SDA into joint fires and charged to be the first to see and first to initiate kill chains on identified threats, and when necessary, help close and assess those kill chains to secure our nation's interests. Space Delta II planners are working with higher level organizations to transition this detachment into the Space Force's first dedicated battle management squadron. Space battle management requires credible domain awareness. It's important to emphasize that domain awareness is limited by many factors, to include sensor placement, physics, technology, and refresh rate. To put it more plainly, space domain awareness on its best day still gives us an incomplete and time-delayed model of reality. To mitigate this, Space Delta II uses tactics, techniques, and procedures, along with commanding and optimizing the space surveillance network, to optimize SDA through space battle management toward competitive endurance. Thankfully, we have recently increased investments in geosynchronous SDA and are looking to further mitigate SDA limitations in other regimes. Our close and integrated relationship with Space Systems Command allows for gap identification, and I'm personally grateful for F. Schnell's leadership in bringing on the ground-based optical sensor system to succeed our current GEODS network and the deep space advanced radar capability. I want to highlight another key partnership, one with the Air Force Research Laboratory, under my friends Colonel Jeremy Raley, Joseph Roth, and Kate Cantu. AFRL hosts our Detachment 2 at the Starfire Optical Laboratory, where they conduct cutting-edge research and development activities, and at the 15th Space Surveillance Squadron here on Maui, maintaining close ties with their AFRL counterparts at the Maui Space Surveillance Complex, working to transition developmental systems to operations. And I'd be remiss if I did not mention friendship and operations with our international partners. Space has no borders, and dangers that exist for any of us exist for all of us. Space Delta II has a liaison officer in Australia, working closely with the Space Surveillance Unit, supporting multiple space activities. And we look forward soon to fielding an SDA payload on one of Japan's QZSS spacecraft. I will close, and I know I ran through that because I wanted to give you an opportunity to ask questions. I think the message is simple, and I just want to reiterate it. If deterrence fails and competition turns into conflict, Space Delta II stands ready to identify threats in the space domain, provide combat identification and targeting solutions, and offer options to the United States Space Command and the President of the United States to achieve and maintain space superiority. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Colonel. Appreciate that. For the first question, how does the environmental monitoring mission fit into your SBM vision now and in the future?
So I think it's important to recognize that our first step is simply to understand what man-made objects are in orbit and in XGO. But I think we're becoming more and more aware of the physics that impose themselves upon our activities in space. NASA has been an incredible partner in teaching us how to appreciate the problem of the third body and how other planets actually act upon our spacecraft as they exit Earth's orbit. The physics of the sun, the physics of simply just being in space, and even the ionosphere on the Earth is affecting how we do operations. Now, as a warfighter, I'm mostly concerned about how those physics impose themselves upon an engagement. But right now we actually monitor, let me say it in a better way, we own 2 constellations that provide terrestrial environmental monitoring, and we're in partnership with NOAA as they command and control those constellations for us. That's the beginning of that conversation of understanding the terrestrial, providing that continued capability to the joint fight, while at the same time extending that logic into space. So we're looking for every avenue to, again, understand the domain awareness aspect of what space provides us in terms of military options. Hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you. Another question we have is, you discussed Space Delta II's involvement in both SDA and SBM. But in your words, can you describe the difference between SDA and SBM, and what vision do you have for tactical SBM operations?
That's a good question. So I've gotten a lot of questions, even from my peers, about taking ownership of this word or this concept of battle management. I do not believe that Space Delta II are the only warfighters that engage in battle management. Battle management is the idea of orienting the domain to achieve warfighting objectives, and SDA is fundamental to that. I do believe as we evolve as a service, and I'm speaking purely from my own perspective as a Delta II commander, I believe the right thing to do is to work with industry and our international partners to collectively create domain awareness, and then use domain awareness for the purposes of military options or space flight safety or any other utility. And so the more that we can involve the community in creating SDA, the more I can focus on orienting that domain, orienting that terrain to achieve warfighting objectives. So battle management is the military application of SDA in this case. And I do believe at the moment we happen to have the preponderance of ability to orient the domain in support of the warfighter, either in domain or across the joint force.
Thank you, sir. We have received no additional questions. You did too good of a job explaining. So.
That's fantastic. Either that's success or I completely confused everyone.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Well, it sounds like I'm done. No one else has any questions, so thanks very much for your time. Appreciate it.